so much. How are you?
I'm really good. So I need to know, first and
Yes.
foremost, how'd you come up with that name?
Chasing Heroine. Great question. So heroine, obviously, with an E. It's a play on words of heroin. And actually, that's a great question for now, too, because I just found this definition of heroic that supports it even more. So I was reading the book Good Morning Monster. Have you read that book?
No.
So it's a therapist who chronicled 5 different patients. It's nonfiction. And normally I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I'll read like self-help books, like personal growth and development. But I don't read a lot of like biographies. And I don't even know why. Oh, I read it because it was on Kindle Unlimited.
Okay.
And I was ripping through books so much. I had like a habit. I was spending like $90 a month on books because I read really fast.
Okay.
And it was too. So anyways, I went to Kindle Unlimited and I said, well, I need to find books on Kindle Unlimited. And it was on there. And I read it. And it was really good. I highly recommend it.
What is it called again?
Good Morning Monster.
Good Morning Monster.
And it's so good. It's 5 case studies of this woman, this therapist, and she writes their journey and like their sessions and what she does to treat them. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And in the very end, she quotes someone else's definition of heroic. And he said, being heroic in its most refined sense is that moment in a narrative when the forces of life make a stronger assertion than death. And it's like the moment in our life when we fight back, when we choose life.
Yeah.
And that's why the name is Chasing Heroine. Now, I hadn't found that definition until a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
but the way I came to it was I ultimately found the best version of me in the bottom of a spoon, which I was not expecting. I was so ashamed about being a heroin addict because I went to a really good school. You know, we'll probably get into it more, but and from this great family. My parents love me. They're super supportive. They're really good people. Not, you know, when you think heroin addict who was homeless, you don't always think, you know, often
There's
you
a
have some
stigma with that.
stereotypical assumptions about like what your life must have been like. And I had this amazing family life and I was going to go to law school and I lost all these things. I felt like I had lost all these things.
Yeah.
And I was so embarrassed. And through a series of revelations that I had in my recovery, I realized that my addiction and subsequent recovery and spiritual path and quest for personal development brought me to the best version of me, to my inner heroine.
I love
So chasing
that.
heroin,
Yeah.
I was actually chasing my inner heroine.
Ooh, that's good stuff right there. That is a reel right there in itself.
And thank you for asking, because you would be amazed the number of people, or maybe you wouldn't be because now you're online too, the number of people that think I'm just saying chasing heroin. And they're like, do you have a language policy on here?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, fuck you. You're just talking about chasing dope online. And I'm like,
God.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
I actually called it chasing heroin, like chasing dope. And I'm like, no,
Right.
bro, there's an E. And
Yeah.
TikTok won't even let you search my name, which
Oh,
is so
wow.
annoying. Yeah, you can
Even
search.
with an E?
Even with an E. Well, it doesn't even let you get that far. If you get to HEROI, it shuts off. And it's
Wow.
like, you're looking for something that we're flagging.
I didn't realize
It's
they
really
did that.
annoying.
I know they do that with fentanyl because I've tried to
Oh,
do
they
that.
do? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, with what is it that when we're doing, or just the word fentanyl, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it
okay.
like won't push out and just all different things.
Yeah.
but-
And like, I do get it, but there is also the word heroin. And I'm not the only one that uses it. There's that fit clothing line, Heroin Sport.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're like a Carbon 38
Okay.
line. So I'm sure there are other people that occasionally need the word. So anyways,
yeah.
But the number of people that think I'm just saying chasing heroin, or they think I've misspelled it. Like on Facebook recently, somebody was like, if you're going to put yourself out there, you should probably spell the word right.
Oh man.
But someone wrote her back, which is the great thing about eventually getting some followers. I didn't even see it. And someone was like, she means heroin. It's a play on words. It's actually really deep.
Yeah.
I was like, yes,
Yeah, you're like, thank you.
Yeah.
How has it been for you? Because I felt it a lot, being out there in the media, on social media, with the feedback. Like for you, when you get that negative feedback, those quote unquote haters, which seem to a lot of time be the same sex, which is really disappointing. How do you deal with that?
Not always very well.
Okay, thanks for the honesty.
Yeah. So I have found too with me, and this hopefully doesn't sound like a cop out because I think it is really true. A lot of what I do is humorous, right? Like the most recent reel was men sober living. We're in sober living.
Yeah, I love your funny reels.
So I've got like that fake beard on. And we have many male counterparts that make jokes like that. Junkie Memes is one. And those sites do really well. Male hosts.
Yep.
When I make reels like that,
Yeah.
especially on Facebook in particular, the comments, and there it actually gets from men a lot.
Okay.
Or they're brutal. They're like, look at this fucking whore. I mean,
Oh my
bad stuff.
God.
Yes, like really aggressive.
So messed up.
And I try not to let it bother me. And for the most part, it doesn't. Like, of the areas in my life, it bothers me the least to get criticized on this. If you said I was I also teach spin. I've been in fitness for a long time.
Yeah.
And if someone said you're a terrible spin teacher, or if they gave me a bad review on Yelp about my spin teach, it would crush me. But for some reason, I feel like God has given me a little bit of grace on this one.
Yeah.
Where I can handle it a little bit better. Sometimes I try to clap back, but then I usually go back and delete it because I don't want to be combative in the comments, because I feel like when you see someone who's obnoxious, if I am trying to present myself as someone that is an example of what life can look like, I don't also want to look like some combative asshole
Exactly.
in the comments.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
No, I'm the same way too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I had someone the other day, they wrote me and said, so are you interviewing just like everyday people now? Are you even doing real stories anymore? And I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like,
Every single story is real.
Yeah, I don't even like seek out celebrities or people with lots of followers.
Do they
like,
mean Eden or something?
I don't know, but I'm like, I interview people that have an amazing story.
Right.
And I interview anybody that wants to come on the podcast.
Right. Yeah.
Because you got to look at it like,
I usually do too.
you know what? Like, that person actually wants to do this, have a voice. And I also try to look at it like, that's their special day for them.
Yeah,
You know, for us,
totally.
we might podcast all the time, but that's going to be a memory for them for the rest of their lives. So if they want to come on and do it, I don't care if they have 200 followers. I'm going to bring them on because this is what it's all about. Like, recovery stories.
Right.
Where, you know,
They also they'll give you more.
oh, for sure.
They'll listen to your shows ahead of time. They really want to do it right.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes if you interview someone that does a lot of this, it's, it's hard, because I like to get the specific story sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are a little reluctant to do that because in the 12-step world, we're not really supposed to get into the details as much. But I think there's a massive value in getting into the details, because one of the reasons why I didn't think I could get clean or stay clean is because my story was so dark. And when I would go to meetings and I would see people share, I would think, there's no way you did what I did. There's no way. And of course, certainly sometimes they had, but there's a value in saying, no, I lived inside of a bush.
Yeah.
And I drove here, or I interviewed this woman recently. Her name's Christina. She was so great. It was like the best day of her life. She was so proud. She shared it. She was trafficked. So she went to Hawaii to go to rehab, and she left after like 2 months. It was a behavioral control one where they yell at you and all that behavior modification. And she left and she got stuck in Hawaii for 10 years. She showed up there at 20 and she got stuck for 10 years doing meth, doing heroin. And she got trafficked to be a sex worker in a massage parlor while she was there by some guy. That didn't happen to me. And now she has 4 years. She's done a successful methadone taper, which is also something I like to show.
Yeah.
She wants to have kids. And it is so important for another woman to hear that story.
Absolutely.
And because if you listen to me, I don't know as much about your background, but you might think, well, I got forced to be a prostitute in this massage brothel place. You have no idea, but if you hear Christine, so I think that the stories are really valuable.
Absolutely. Like for me, I didn't even tell my whole story until I was about 5 years into my recovery.
Yeah.
For that reason too, like, man, I don't know if I can say all this. How's it going to come off? Are people going to judge? Da, 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 da. And it's like, because I was still working on myself at that point. But the last 2 years, I've told my story completely.
Yeah.
And the feedback that I've got, that relatability, it's like, it's so valuable to have that vulnerability, you
It
know,
totally
to help
is.
tell that story. Okay, so let's take it back.
Yep.
So you said you had a really good family life. So tell us, you know, what your childhood was like.
So I grew up in Georgia in
Okay.
a little place called Peachtree City, which is super cute. My dad's a pilot, and everybody that lived there was pilots or worked for the airlines mostly.
Okay.
Parents are still married, or I'm sorry, they're not still married. They got divorced when I was like 18.
Okay.
So they were married while I was growing up. And it was a really idyllic childhood. You know, my dad coached all the teams for me and my brother, and they were really supportive. Anything I wanted to do, my mom would tell me all the time how smart I was. I was the smartest person in the room. You know, my dad was really
Yeah.
supportive as well. But they were also fairly disciplined. You know, I had a curfew and they were pretty strict, but they also really walked their talk. Like neither one of them, I can count on one hand how many times I've heard either one of them even cuss.
Oh, wow.
Like they're very upright citizens, but they're not too uptight. I don't know. I just think I don't have kids, but if I had, I would have done it the way they did it. I just really think that, especially as I get older and I meet other people and I hear
Yeah.
about their parents,
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, my parents did a really good job.
Yeah.
They promoted my education. I don't know. They protected us, but they also showed us the world. I just think that they did a really good job. I got the SAT tutors and got to take the AP classes. And when I was 16, you know, I got a car, but I had to pay for half of it and I got to pay them back over time. You know, just like the right things you should do where I had
Yeah.
to earn it, but it was also given to me.
Yeah.
My sponsor and I are from completely different worlds, and we joke about that sometimes. She was saying to me once, I know this is a common phrase, but she was like, you know how sometimes your mom would say, quit crying, I'll give you something to cry about. And I said, no. My mother never said that to
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And then conversely, I said to her once, I said, you know, like the day you turn 16 and your parents check you out from school early so you can go get your license photo and drive your own car to school the next day. Rachel was like, fuck no.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I've never known anyone that got to do that. She was
Yeah.
like, Jeannine, that's not a thing. And I was like, right. So anyways, I think they did a great job, you know? And then I will say when they split up, I lost my mind. I
Yeah.
completely lost my
Did
mind.
you know it was coming? I mean, was there like
No idea. No,
wow.
it was completely out of the blue. And I think one of the reasons it was so hard is because it was so good. You know, I have friends whose parents have gotten divorced, and it was almost a relief because they were
Right.
fighting all the time,
Yeah.
and mine weren't. You know,
Were you
was-
still living at home at this time?
I
or-
was.
Okay.
Yeah, I was. That was the summer after my junior year. I'd actually gone away to a camp, and when I came back, my mom picked me up and said, "So your dad has been staying at the amphitheater. He ran like the music amphitheater in town, and I had no idea. It was definitely a shock for me and my brother. And their backstory is complicated as marriages can be. So there's a lot there that's, you know, like their story, obviously, that I don't ever talk about. And
Yeah.
obviously it wasn't completely out of the blue, but it was as far as we knew or
Yeah,
anybody in the
exactly.
community knew, because they did also have a great deal of respect for each other. They were best friends.
Yeah.
Yes, and they never fought or said bad things about each other until they were getting divorced. And, you know, I
Yeah.
have learned that the best people in a divorce I've seen, it just shows their worst
Oh,
side. You know, one of my best friends recently got divorced, and she's like this good Southern woman. And during her divorce, I flew and saw her. And I opened the hotel room door and I was just surprised. She just looked like angry and thin, and her gray hair was coming in and she hadn't
Yeah.
colored it, and she was just mad.
Yeah.
And now she's back to her.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
during the divorce, it was
Very emotional.
brutal. Have you
Yeah,
been divorced?
I
Okay.
had 2 gnarly divorces.
So you know.
And it's one of the most emotional things you go through.
Right.
There's so many different emotions that are,
Right.
it's a lot.
On the pain scale, it's like one of the highest
Oh.
things where they've, you know, rated like different pain, emotional pain. It's way
it
up there.
makes sense. Yeah.
And my parents they fell apart during that time. And so that definitely was not helpful. But, you know, I always point out my brother went through the same divorce and he didn't shoot heroin.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Do you think that was like the triggering moment for you, or
it was a triggering moment for me to start doing things I wouldn't normally have done. Right. So
which were
So I was really good academically. I did very well academically. I did well in my SATs. I got an early admission to a really good school in Washington, D.C. I did debate. I was kind of a nerd. The only thing I did was smoke cigarettes.
okay?
I didn't drink or do anything else. I did smoke cigarettes.
So you hadn't drank, smoked weed, nothing, and you're 18.
I smoked weed once when I was
Okay.
like 16 and I got really scared. I thought it was laced with something. And And I thought it was laced until recently.
Okay.
And then recently I was like, no, it wasn't. I was just 16
You were
and
16.
paranoid. Yeah. And I freaked out. It was probably
yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And like I had a couple of beers and like Mad Dog, great Mad Dog, you know,
I don't.
So there's Mad Dog 2020, that like liqueur, that hard liquor that you can get at the gas station. Maybe this is a Georgia thing.
Maybe, yeah.
So I'd had that before.
Okay.
Goofy kid shit.
No
but
drunk partying, nothing like
not
that.
a lot.
Yeah.
No. So it did kind of open up the door for me to do different things because I did feel like, and I remember distinctly thinking this. I remember thinking they tricked us. And again, with the hindsight of age, I of course know that that wasn't true.
Yeah.
But at the time, I remember thinking, oh, fuck you. You sold me on this like Leave It to Beaver family and you were both full of shit the whole time?
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Watch this.
Yeah.
You wanted me to do
rebelling.
well? Yeah. You wanted me to do well with school? I'm not going to go anymore. Fine. And so I didn't. And I still graduated, but I wasn't like an honor grad in the end. And I had gotten an early admission to that school. So I still went. But that last year, my senior year, I completely fell apart. Wasn't going to school anymore. I started dating my restaurant manager, of course. It's very cliche, who was 22 and I was 17 and his older brother was 26 and he was dating my friend and they were buying us beer and blah, blah. But it still wasn't nearly as bad as it got. So it kind of opened up the door for that.
Right.
And then when I left to go to school, I just couldn't make it work. But also I always include that I think that there are hallmarks of addiction that are behavioral. And one of them is the rules don't apply to me. The rules don't apply to us.
Yeah.
And I have found that to be so true across the addicts and alcoholics that I know. And high school is easier than college, right? Like it just is.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to work that hard in high school to do well. And when I got to school, when I got to college, it wasn't like that. And I definitely wasn't the smartest kid in the room anymore. I wasn't the smartest kid in my dorm room for sure, you know? And so I think had they not split up, maybe I would have been prepared to do the extra work, but they had.
So what was
and I
that
didn't.
conversation in your head? Because you know, very good kid in the sense of like academically and your structure and your routine. So what was that like conversation when you were just like, I'm not going to do this anymore?
I remember thinking it didn't matter anyway.
Okay.
I said it didn't matter anyway. I remember thinking I should have had more fun. I'm trying to like toe the line and be an adult like you two so that I can have a marriage like yours and live in a house like this.
Yeah.
And you can do all the right things and look at you. And I think what I was thinking was I was looking at my mom and thinking she did all the right things and he is leaving anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. She's a fool.
Yeah.
And now I obviously don't believe that. But at the time,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And a lot of my independence came from her. I'm really proud of my mom. She kept her name when she got married, and it was in the 70s when nobody really did it.
Yeah.
And she always worked, and she was very, you know, the book that Glennon Doyle wrote, the Cheetah book.
Yeah.
So when I read that book, all those things that you can do with your daughter are like revolutionary. My mom did all those things when I was a kid, when it would have been revolutionary. When I was reading it, I thought my mom did all of this.
Yeah.
I felt like I could sit at any table, women or not, you know, and it was important to her that I do that because that's how she had moved through the world. She never wore makeup. She didn't care what she looked like. She still doesn't do Botox or anything like that. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like,
same
Mom,
as my mom.
I'm like, clean it up. But I also respect that, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought, and I was happy to be like her. And then that happened. And then he left.
Yeah.
And I was like, look what that got you. Look what your master's degree got you. Nothing. So I know it's important. I need to lose weight. I need to get prettier. I've actually I don't think I've ever shared this. That was my first intention. I was like, I need to change this because I look like you.
Oh, yeah.
And that didn't work.
Oof. Yeah.
And so I completely changed how I dressed and what I look like. And my entire world became about getting men's attention and holding men's attention. And can I do that?
Yeah.
And that matters more than anything else. And that was what I started doing. And the conversation, was something like, it doesn't even matter anyways.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter anyways. I should have partied more.
Yeah.
None of this matters.
Yeah.
AP Spanish doesn't matter. Who cares?
And I love that you're saying all that because I feel like it's a story a lot of times. I mean, obviously a little different, but that, you know, women, men, they start feeling that way when these things start to happen. Like you said it perfectly. Like it all makes sense how you would start going down that path.
Right.
So where did the drugs come into play?
So when I went to that school in DC for one semester and I just couldn't stay. I left and I went to the University of Georgia and it followed me, right? Because it wasn't the school, and it was me, and I was having this little nervous breakdown. Went to Georgia, and I couldn't go to school there either. Again, rules don't apply to me. You had to take a, this is so dumb. This used to drive me crazy. You had to drive to a parking garage. University of Georgia is a huge state school. You have to drive to a parking garage and then take a bus to like your building.
Okay. You didn't want to do that.
Yeah, which is like not a big deal.
Right.
But I thought that was just the biggest burden. I didn't want to do it. And the couple of times I did, I would be late and drive up on the curb and park in front of like vending machines, and my car would get towed. Just a brat.
Yeah, it's funny because I was at a meeting last night and they were literally talking about this. Like, before we know it, we have that restlessness, irritability, discontent, and everything starts to get annoying.
Yes.
You know, like every little thing, when you look at it, you're like, that shouldn't have been annoying.
No, of course not. Everybody else did it. So I just didn't want to do any of that. So I ended up deciding that instead of go to college, I was going to move to LA, and it would be easier to win an Oscar than get a college degree. And I really believed that.
Okay.
And another hallmark of addiction is delusions of grandeur. So it was like this combination of rules don't apply to me, I don't have to graduate, and delusions of grandeur. I'm just going to be famous instead. Yeah. And this is for suckers. You guys can take school tests and stuff, and I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to go make $1 million and be famous. So I quit school, but I stayed there for a year to bartend and save up money. And that's where the drugs came into place. So I quit school for my last year and started bartending. And that was when I did cocaine for the first time. And I always say that, you know, in meetings, in AA meetings, people will say the first time I drank, I knew it just filled that hole. So I did not feel that way with alcohol necessarily. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't feel like that. But I did feel like that with cocaine.
Okay.
The first time I did cocaine, I was like, oh my gosh, is this how everyone else feels? Yeah. Like I can do life like this. Yeah. I can't do it that other way. That's not working for me, but I can do it like this. I was happy. I was helpful. Like I was a very grumpy bartender. I never wanted to wait on chicks because I still had my whole weird guy thing happening. Yeah. And so like if women walked up to the bar, group of like sorority girls, they would always, I'd be standing there smoke inside, and they'd walk up, bumble up, and I would just like roll my eyes, and they'd say, oh, what do we want? You know, what do you want? What's good? I don't fucking. And they'd be like, hey, ask Brittany, what did we have at the other place? Which is like fine, but I would just be like, fight and walk away, and somebody else could get them. Just that kind of stuff. But on cocaine, I was like, well, I don't know. What do you like? You know, and I was like this girl's girl, and I was fun. You know, so that's when that started. But I never bought it. Another thing that has been true in my story that is just like hallmark addiction is the progression. Right. And that first year, I never bought it. I just did it when, you know, the boys had it. It was also sort of like a Southern Georgia thing, which is so funny. The boys bought the drugs. It was like, put your money away. If I tried to like pull out money, which was not like that later in life. So I never bought it. And I did save enough money to go to LA. And so I did. Yeah. And I started doing coke again, like immediately in LA for the first 6 months, pretty hardcore. I did get a job working, and I never missed a shift working or anything. Yeah. But I would show up tired sometimes, and certainly wasn't doing any acting stuff. And it got super out of control for 6 months maybe. And I told my mom. My mom by then had moved to San Diego. Thank God for me. She got remarried, and he happened to get moved with his work to Orange County, actually. So they moved here. I told her what was going on, and we had this long conversation about it. And at that time, I was able to dial it back. I moved out of where I was because the connection was someone that I lived with. And so I moved out. My brother gave me like $600 to put down on another apartment, and I moved out, and I didn't do coke again for 3 years. Okay. And I always used to point to that later as evidence that I was not really a drug addict.
Of course.
Now, I smoked weed every day of those 3 years and drank, you know, and I actually forgot about this recently. I found meth during that time as well, which I loved way more than coke. And so the first way that I got off of cocaine, this is insane. I had a calendar on my wall, and I would mark 3 times in the month I could smoke meth. And I would let myself smoke meth 3 times. to not do coke. That was like my trade-off.
Yeah. Just the rationalizing and making excuses. And that's,
Well, or later to say, well, I wasn't an addict because I quit doing coke for 3 years. I mean, I was doing meth, but
and
no coke.
People will say
that was recovery.
I'll hear people that are like, well, I'm not really an addict or an alcoholic. I can go X amount of time, or I can only do this. And
right.
So yeah.
And that was my justification for a long time. So 3 years later, coke came back into my life big time, and then it didn't stop. And then I did it for 3 years pretty straight, and started feeling actual like drug addict consequences, right?
Okay.
The relationship I was in, the guy was mad at me all the time. I was definitely spending too much money. I was not getting things done. Then I was missing work. And at that time, thank God, I also happened to get certified for spin and yoga, like kind of during that time. Because for me with coke, I would do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week. It wasn't nightly or daily.
Yeah.
So I could still kind of get things done. For me, cocaine bad was very, very different from heroin bad, which I discovered later. So during that time, I was able to get certified, and which thank God, because that has like saved my life over time, you know? So I got certified, but things got really bad and my car died, and you can't really live in LA without, actually you probably can, but I was way too spoiled of a person to live in LA without a car.
Yeah.
So I left LA, moved to San Diego.
Okay.
And that is when I started using heroin. So I moved in with my mom for a few months at like 29 years old, 30, and moved out, met this guy, and he had a roommate that I started dating.
Okay.
And he was a Marine. He'd gotten out of the Marine Corps, and he'd done a couple of tours overseas, and he had some pretty serious PTSD and some brain trauma injuries and things like that. And he had been addicted to opiates before, and like I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And that was how I got introduced to heroin, was ultimately through him.
So did you know you had a problem at this time? Or are you still in denial?
So I believed that the coke was a problem. Like I knew that in my soul. You know how you have those moments? I remember in Georgia taking a shower and sitting on the floor of the bathtub and kind of praying to God. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like I felt really guilty to God. And I knew deep down that there was kind of a problem with the coke, even back then. I feel like our spirit kind of knows. By then, I fully acknowledged that the cocaine was a problem. My boyfriend had broken up with me about it. I had to leave LA, which was supposedly this big dream of mine.
Right.
I believed the coke was a problem, but I didn't think that drinking was a problem for me.
Yeah.
And I in no way was going to stop drinking.
Right.
Or probably even stop doing cocaine. I just needed to not do it that often, you know?
Yeah.
So I sort of thought that I had a problem, but not in the recovery sense I got to later, which is I'm powerless over this.
Yeah.
And this is the option for me. So sort of, but not really.
Yeah. So what was that like, that, you know, conversation again with yourself, that thought process of actually doing heroin?
So I'd been with that guy for a while, like a year and a half probably. And I was doing really well. I was teaching at, you're from the area. So, you know, Rancho Valencia Resort in San Diego. It's really nice. It's like a really nice resort. I was teaching there. I was teaching bar and private Pilates for like $100 an hour in 2010. I was making great money. I got certified to teach bar, and I was just drinking. And occasionally he would have pills that I think were Percocet, but that was about it. So we'd been together for a while. It wasn't like a super healthy relationship, but it wasn't what it got to, you know, later. And I was out of town for a week, and I couldn't get in touch with him. And this guy is also very, 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 very good looking, which is probably why a lot of this happened. But like stop in the street, stare at him, good looking, objectively good looking. So I was out of town, and I was objectively crazy. So he's really hot and I'm really crazy. And so
great combo.
Yeah. And so I'm out of town and I can't get in touch with him. And I said, I thought, I know what he's fucking cheating on me for sure. And this is why I can't get in touch with him. I know it. So he lived maybe 20 minutes away from me. I came back from being out of town, jumped in my car, drove out to where he lived, drove up into the front yard, kicked through the door. And I remember his roommate was playing like Call of Duty or something on the couch. And he was like, Jeannine, you can't just do that. And I was like, whatever, Chris. And I went straight to the back and like threw open his door. He had this like slider that didn't lock. And I opened his door.
Yeah.
And there was no one. He was in there with no one else, and all the lights were off, and there was like this haze of cigarette smoke in the air, and it just smelled maybe like weed, and maybe he had gotten sick, like throw up. and there was just a movie on and little tinfoil weed pipes everywhere because he was cheap and he would just like make one out of weed.
Yeah.
I mean, out of tinfoil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was alone. And I said, what are you fucking doing? I've been trying to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, you're back. And I'm like, yeah, I'm back. What's going on?
Yeah.
And he said, I'm sick. I'm like, really sick. And I said, all right, well, you made me drive here. So you need to put gas in my car because, again, I was crazy. And I said, so get up and come with me to the gas station. It's your fault I'm here because you didn't answer my text.
Yeah.
And he actually said, he was like, okay.
Emily's loving this.
Yeah. Can't you see some crazy girl doing this? I was like, you owe me $10, my gas.
We're both
For
like,
sure.
we've done this.
For sure. Yeah. I'm like, so get up. So he did. And we go to the gas station and his car got declined for $10.
Oh, wow.
And then for $5. And so we're driving back and he was just silent. And I said, look, I know that you had a problem with oxys in the past. If you're using again, you can tell me. It's okay. I used to be a coke addict, right? And I know how to stop doing drugs. I can help you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, I am doing something, but it's not oxy. And by then we had pulled up into his yard again. And I said, okay. And he said, but before I tell you what's going on, I just want to tell you that I know what you're going to have to do after I say this. And I just want to say that I'm so sorry. And I really wanted to be different for you.
Wow.
I know. And I always like to make sure I humanize him because like none of this is this guy's fault. He did have the stereotypical family that you become a heroine. You know what I mean? That when you think of just all of these things. And I said, okay, what? And he said, I'm been doing heroin. And I had the same response I think anybody would have when you hear heroin. Like, holy shit, that's the worst one. I mean, now there's fentanyl, but that wasn't then. I'm like, holy shit, that's the worst one. You're thinking like needles, HIV, train spotting junkies under the bridge, you know? And it felt like all of the air in my car just like, and I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't even believe this was happening. And when I kind of came back into my body, he had gotten out of the car and was walking back into his house. And I just remember thinking, everyone leaves him. He has no one in his life, which was pretty true. I'm not leaving. And we'd been together for 1.5 years at that point. It wasn't like a new relationship, So I got out of the car and I followed him into his room and I said, I'm not going to leave you. Like, I'll help you. And I was Googling, how do you help someone detoxing from heroin? Which of course now I know there is no help for someone detoxing from heroin except for Suboxone maybe, or a jail cell, know? So I'm getting in like chicken soup and Gatorade. And it's so, it was so naive now when I look back. The next day when he was at work, I remember calling him or texting him and saying, hey, how are you feeling? And he said, oh, great, much better. And I was like, oh, good. Okay. And I'm thinking it's like Coke, you kind of slept it off. And now I know what happened. He got well at work with one of the guys. That's who, So, and I don't even really remember exactly how it happened, but a month progressed of, are you using? No, yes, you are, blah, blah, blah. Like the common, the thing that every addict goes through with somebody that's asking if they're using.
Yeah.
And I think I walked in on him in the bathroom and he was smoking. And I said something like, because he was just smoking. He wasn't using needles at that point. And I said, if it's that great, and I was drunk, let me try it. And he didn't want me to his credit. He didn't really want me to, but he let me.
Yeah.
And I did.
Like a shot?
No, we were smoking.
Okay,
He only smoked at that point. So I just smoked it. And I didn't even like it that much at first. It was okay. But it did give me the boost of Coke and the feel-good effects of cocaine. But I could sleep. And the only reason cocaine stopped working for me was because I couldn't sleep. And then I would be dog sick the next day.
Yeah.
Just like laying on the floor.
Oof, yeah.
But this was the highs of Coke and the feel-good of the euphoria of cocaine, but I could sleep. So I kind of started doing it with him consistently. And maybe a month later, I wasn't going to go out to his house. I was going to stay home. And we had a mutual friend that lived closer to me. And I started not feeling good. I remember I was going to go take a reformer Pilates class, which is so, again, the dichotomy between like smoking heroin and then doing a bougie reformer Pilates class. Before it was like 2010, 11. And a mutual friend of ours called and said, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, I was going to take a Pilates class, but I'm not really feeling good. And he said, Jeannine, you're dope sick.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm not. Oh, she's so cute.
I'm sorry.
No, but she's really cute.
She's making all sorts of sounds.
She's really well behaved, though.
Down.
Tank
snorts.
He would have destroyed the entire studio by now. Like all of it. He would have pulled everything down. When I see dogs like that, I'm amazed. My dog is insane.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get back to this.
So I said, I'm not dope sick. That's for you guys. I don't do it enough. And he said, well, why don't you come over here and smoke with me? And you can see. And of course I was like, sure. So I went over.
Prove you wrong.
Yeah. And I brought my own straw and he handed me a straw in the foil. And I said, oh, I'm going to use my own straw. I don't want to get you sick.
Yeah.
And I really like this guy. He was,
What are your symptoms?
When you're dope sick, runny nose. At that point, it would have been super bad. You feel kind of achy. You might start getting a runny nose. You might sneeze. Everybody describes it as the flu.
Yeah.
But it's a bazillion million times worse than the flu.
Did you have like the creepy crawlies and the ickiness at that point, or?
For me, the worst part was the achiness and the restlessness. And it's just an overall sense of just like, you really don't feel good. You can't do anything. I could not sit here and have this conversation with you. Like I would have to leave. You can't do anything, but you can't sleep.
Yeah.
It just sucks.
Yeah.
And you can't feel that way for long.
Yeah. I know.
And so that was sort of starting.
Okay.
And I said, well, I'm going to use my own straw. And I remember he just looked so sad. And so I used my own straw and I immediately felt better. And I looked at him and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Did I just get addicted? Did I just get accidentally addicted to heroin?
Yeah.
And he said, Jeannine, we told you. And I said, no, you did not. No, you did not really tell me. No, you did not. And he was like, we did. We have absolutely told you don't do it, which was true. They had. And I said, so what do I do now?
So this was after how long that you were addicted and having withdrawals?
Probably 2 months of doing it with him pretty consistently. I mean, I must have done it 3 weeks in a row because this is how this was happening. You have to do it for a few weeks in a row. Now, if I did it again, it would be like 3 days and then I'd probably get sick. But at that time. And so I said, well, what do I do now? Like, I don't want to be addicted to heroin.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you can kick. How long does that take? 2 weeks. And I said, I don't have 2 weeks. Like, I have to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
So what do I do? And he said, you can buy some dope. And I was like, okay. And I remember I was just shocked. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just buy some heroin. How much does it cost?
Yeah.
He said $20. And I was like, okay, I mean, where do I go? Is he scary? Does he have a gun? And he was like, no, it's my buddy Brooke. He's not scary. And Brooke actually helps me get clean later. He's like the primary reason I ended up getting clean and sober later. Yeah. And so anyways, I meet my first connection. I went over there and, bought it. $20 worth of heroin.
Yeah.
And in 10 months, I was homeless.
Wow. So over that 10 months, what'd that look like?
And the reason that usually happens is because and I kept my habit kind of in check. I bet the most I was ever spending was $40. But what starts to happen is, it probably wasn't always $40, but even if it's $40 a day over 30 days in a month.
Yeah. That's a lot.
How much is that? That's $2,000, right?
Yeah. 40. Yeah.
So that's more than you can make plus pay rent.
Yeah.
So, and it gets to a point where that's how much you have to spend if you're going to keep going to work.
Get in that cycle.
Yeah. And then also what happens is it's not consistent that you can get anything because maybe they didn't get back from Mexico on time or they're not answering because they're knotted out. And so what happens is I'm supposed to be at work at 5:30 at Rancho Santa Fe. And I'm up in Oceanside waiting for someone to text me back who doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm sick and I can't go to work, but I don't know that yet because sometimes they call you at the last minute and you make it. So I'm waiting until 5 to call out 30 minutes before my class. And you do that 5 times, you're fired.
Yeah.
So like that's what starts happening, right? You start calling out, you can't make it to things because you can't get dope and you're sick. And so even if you make enough money that you could constantly buy stuff daily, it's just not consistent. Something happens and you can't get it one day. And also stuff started happening like I'm not able to pay my rent on time. That happens. And so my roommate eventually ended up asking me to move out. And then, you're staying in the car and my ex took the car to go do something and he got pulled over, didn't have a license and it got impounded. Now you're homeless.
Wow.
And that's how that happens because you can't afford to get the car out of impound.
Yeah.
And that's like the path from regular person to homeless, right? You can't pay for the registration on your car.
Yeah.
You get pulled over, they can tell you're a drug addict. Even if you're not a fourth waiver, they have the choice to tow your car or not. If you got pulled over tomorrow, or me, hopefully, they would just say, all right, call somebody, we'll leave it here.
Yeah.
But if if they can tell you're a drug addict, they're going to tow your car. And like, that's kind of what happens. So, and I was homeless and strung out from that point for like 5 years.
Wow.
So I never got it together again until 2015.
So your mom and dad, your brother, where were they at while this was all going on?
So my brother and my dad still live in Georgia.
Okay.
And I had told my mom at some point what was going on and was doing a methadone detox. I had in those 10 months attempted to stop with a methadone detox. That didn't work for me. And so she did know what was going on. And then I'm super close to my dad, and what he thinks of me is the most important thing in the world to me. So like when I left LA, I didn't want anyone to tell him why. And so I was begging my mom and my brother, don't tell him. And so now I was homeless and staying with my meth dealers in his like little crack house kind of thing. It was it used to be a cell phone store that we had just broken into.
Okay.
And we were staying there.
Yeah.
And my mom did tell my dad finally. So I'd been there for, maybe a month. And we got my car back. My ex took out some money of his 401k. We did get my car back. And, that was just like there was a sketchy month where we were just using, and, I got sick for real for the first time.
Yeah.
That's when I started meeting the people that I would spend the next couple of years with, like people that were in and out of prison. And that's when we started, because we weren't working. That's when we start doing little hustles to get money, like steal things, return it, get the card to get cash, that kind of stuff. So that's when I first started doing that. And somebody finally told my dad, who got me on the phone and said, that's it, you're done. You're going to go to detox. Your mother's looking for you. You're going to go to detox. And I did. And this is such a huge privilege. I learned later, they paid for me to go to a medicated detox.
Wow.
They said they would pay for one. And they did. They only ever paid for that one. They didn't ever pay for it again. But they would pay for one. And then I went to treatment after that. And even on the way to that detox, I started changing my mind and I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And my mom called my dad and she said, Mark, she's freaking out. She's trying to, she wants to jump out of the car. And this is why just the things that my parents said and did. Meanwhile, they're going to Al-Anon, they're going to Nar-Anon. Like they were trying to learn as much as they could, which again, I value. The more people I meet in recovery, I learn most people's parents don't do that.
No,
you know what I mean?
Parents were saints.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our saints.
Yeah. So we're on our way to detox and my dad gets me on the phone and he said, what's the matter? Why don't you want to go? And I said, because I'm going to get really sick. And he said, well, aren't you going to the one with the medication? I thought that was the whole deal. And I said, I am, but you have to wait 24 hours before you take it. And I'm going to be really sick. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, all right, I need you to look at your mother. And they had a horrible contentious divorce. They did not speak again until like this moment. So it's 15 years or something.
Yeah.
And he was like, I need you to look at your mother right now. And she was like, what's he saying? I remember I was like, nothing. And we turned away. And he was like, she's supposed to be at work right now. And she is driving all over San Diego looking for you to try to save your life. And he said, when your mother was giving birth to you, you didn't even start to come out for 24 hours. It was really bad. Oh, wow. She gave you that 24 hours. I need you to give her this 24.
Wow. Yeah.
And then he said, also, there's a Jackson Browne song and one of the lyrics is, in the end, we all have a dance we have to do alone.
Yeah.
And he said, this is it. This is your dance.
Wow.
And if I could do it for you, I would, but I can't. You have to do this dance alone.
What
which I think is,
parents.
I know, isn't that a beautiful thing to say?
Yeah, really.
And he came up with it
Very
on the fly.
touching. Yeah.
He was on a bus surrounded by other pilots. I've asked him since then. It was quiet on a bus taking pilots from the airport to the parking lot. And it's just him and a bunch of other guys. And he answers the phone, quiet in the van. And his daughter's not wanting to get off heroin. And so he like looks around at his co-pilot and he's like,
what a visual.
yeah. He's like, Nina, I need you to get off the dope.
Yeah.
So anyways, I went to detox for the first time, but that didn't work. That was in like 2011 and I didn't stop until 2015.
Okay.
So from there, it was like a series of what often happens with addicts, in and out, in and out, in and out. And then I never lived anywhere again until 2015. So from then on, I was homeless or in a sober living. I got arrested 5 times. My last arrest was for strong arm robbery, and they were going to send me to prison and give me a strike in California. And so my arrest got more severe, and I did eventually start using needles, which is, bound to happen usually. And things just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I was a full on homeless junkie.
It just shows you that it just does not discriminate. And when people say, oh, not me, or oh, this, or oh, that, it's a bunch of bullshit.
Right.
That you're just telling yourself because you came from a good family.
I had college. I mean,
you had everything at your fingertips.
I was educated.
Yeah.
I had a great family. I'd been raised well.
And you still have a great family while you're going through this.
As I go through it.
And you're still in it.
Yes.
Homeless, shooting up heroin.
Yes.
Wow.
Outside.
So, So what was the final straw in 2015?
So New Year's Eve, 2014, I was living in a sober living, and I would live in sober livings and still be using. And I had figured out how to pass a P test.
Okay.
Like no matter what, I could pass a P test. And I'd figured this out. And so I was using, and I was living in this sober living, and it was obvious I was using. You always know when the person is, if there's a girl still using in the house, everybody knows, and everybody hates her. And I was that person. And I'm like super skinny, picked up face on a bike, a different bike every other week, like a kid's huffy bike. I can't find a job. Everyone else is working, clearly using. And on New Year's Eve, they drug tested me that morning. They woke me up, but I was ready. So I passed my drug test. And that guy that I referenced earlier, actually, he ended up getting busted. He did like 2 years in prison, got out, and stayed clean forever. He's still clean to this day. He's married. He's got some kids. Yeah.
Nice.
So he was in sober living. He had just gotten out of prison maybe 6 months before that. And he was always trying to reach back out to me and try to help me. And so he took me out that night to a Chili's for New Year's Eve. And so we were out at the Chili's, and the owner of my sober living called and said, so Jeannine, you left some heroin on the bathroom counter here, and you can't come back. And I thought to myself, obviously, I was like, did I leave dope there?
Is that
Like,
really me?
I need that. Yeah. But I was
I
like,
need that.
Yeah. And I said, nah, I passed a drug test for you this morning. You don't know that dope was mine. 8 other addicts live in that house. You have no way of knowing whether or not that was mine.
Yeah.
And she said, that's true. You did pass a drug test this morning. And I don't know how you've been doing that. But all the other girls are here. And they're all pretty sure it's yours. I'm pretty sure it's yours. But I tell you what, if you can bring me a blood test, I'll support you and you can come back.
Yeah. You couldn't do that.
No. And I said, fine, to her. I said, fine, I'll bring you a blood test tomorrow. She said, okay. And I remember going back to the table, and I was like, oh, fuck, I just got kicked out of my fucking sober living. So he got me a hotel room that night, and we went to the motel room, and I was like, all right, give me your phone, because I had a flip phone. I was like, give me your phone. I need to Google the Tri-City logo, which is like the hospital in Oceanside. So I need to Google the Tri-City logo and what a blood test document looks like. I'm just going to forge this document so, I can go back in. And I said, we go to Kinko's. I've actually had to forge a medical document before. Do it again. It's fine. And as I was talking, he was just staring at me. And he had been supportive of me for, you know how it is. Like sometimes you've got these guy friends in your life that are platonic.
Yeah.
And they support your crazy more than a girlfriend would. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, I'll give you a ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like those
for
guys,
sure.
that,
For sure.
And he was one of them. And he was just staring at me. And I remember sitting down across from him, and I said, all right, don't look at me like that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to forge this document. She's making me forge this document. I was going to kick. Yeah, it's not my fault. I was going to kick. I had a half a Suboxone in a cigarette cellophane. I was like, I was going to kick, but I can't kick outside. I have to be able to get back to the house so I can do my 24 hours. I don't want to do this, but what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And he said, I mean, you could get clean. And I sat down. I can still like see him saying it. And I sat down. And obviously, people had said stuff like that to me before, obviously. But for some reason, and, who knows why, like the longer I'm in this business, we do this with podcasting, who knows why? Because that was not even close to the worst thing that had ever happened, getting kicked out of that sober living. I was in a hotel room. It was not bad. And I remember I just sat down and I thought, oh my God, I guess I could do that. Like, I am working so hard to destroy my life. What am I doing?
Yeah.
But I still had dope, so I wasn't ready that night. And so the next day, I remember I called a connect of mine and I was like, I don't know where I'm going to go. Like, I got kicked out of my sober living. And he said, well, I have somewhere you can go. You can stay in the doghouse in my backyard.
In the doghouse.
And I was like, really? Great. Thank you. Are you sure? And he said, yeah, I'll bring the dog inside and you can stay in the doghouse. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. I'll be there in like 10 minutes.
Wow.
And so my friend brought me to the alley, and it was actually, I always add this, it was like a little shed that had a futon on the ground with like a Chargers blanket on it, and the dog would stay there. And it had a door that he padlocked from the outside at night, and he would bring the dog in and he let me stay there. And I stayed in that shed for 3 nights, and he would lock me in from the outside at night.
Wow.
But it wasn't to keep me in. It wasn't to like kidnap me. It was more to keep people out. So I'm in this shed, and it's January 2015. I'm freezing cold. I remember doing a San Diego reader, and I had a compact with a light on it. And so I was like picking my face in the dark and like shooting meth, shooting heroin, and I'm in this doghouse. And the last night that I was there, the friend that I had lived with, actually when I met my boyfriend, also another one of those guy friends that like, I know they always say in the rooms, you know, stick with the men or whatever, or stick with the women. But the men that I've had in my life that have showed up for me and saved my ass that's who saved my life.
Yeah.
You know,
it's actually been the same for me too.
Has it? Yeah. I mean, they saved my life. And again, platonic.
Right. Same.
No, you know what I mean? Just were there for me, you know? And he was one of them. And also anytime he was back from Afghanistan would call to see if I was okay or alive or whatever. It was the last night, and he called me and said, hey, I'm back. I'm out at 29 Palms. What are you doing? And I said, I am living in a doghouse in Oceanside, and I think I'm going to die. And he was like, okay, that's it. If I come get you tomorrow, will you come with me? And I said, yes, I will. And I had like stolen stuff from him before. And so there's a Burger King right there. And he said, all right, I'm going to be there tomorrow. Be there. And I said, okay. And so the next morning I told my friend, I was like, I'll be right back. I like grabbed my bag and ran to the Burger King. And I actually called my mom, and she was on her way to church, and she stopped by to see me. And I said, can I have $5? I need to buy some cigarettes. And she wouldn't give me any money, but she gave me a Cliff Bar and some chewable vitamin C. And I remember I was like, I don't need this shit, you know, but that's all she would give me. And she was like, okay, honey, I hope this works for you. Because by then my parents had definitely broken the code. The last time they really helped me a lot was that rehab, that detox in 2011. And then they pretty much stuck to their guns. I mean, my mom definitely did more over the years, but they were pretty, you know, they knew what was happening. No money, no cash. So she left me at the Burger King, and he came and got me and drove me out to 29 Palms. And I kicked heroin for the last time at his house.
Oh.
That was it.
No medical detox.
No, I had that half a Suboxone.
Half a Suboxone.
Half of a Suboxone. Yeah. And that was it. I traded some heroin for it. And so I had half of a Suboxone and a cigarette cellophane, and that was it. And I brought a little bit of dope with me. And so that lasted like, I don't know, 2 days. And I remember I felt bad because after a few days, he was like, wow, you're not as sick as normal. And I was like, I know. And then it ran out.
And
I did get really sick. Yes. I ate my 1 Suboxone, and then I drank for the rest of the time, which some people think sounds a little bit crazy, but I had been in a program, so I'd only been using again for about 3 months.
Okay.
And prior to that, I'd had about 3 months. So if this had been after like a year's long run, this would have been much more difficult. Yeah, I think so. But it had been like 3 months. And I kicked heroin for the last time. I watched Game of Thrones, and you know, I already had my sponsor. I'd been working with the same person for a long time. She's still my sponsor to this day.
Yeah.
And so I was calling her, and my friend that had taken me to the Chili's was trying to get me into a sober living, and he did. And
so you truly surrendered this time.
You know, yeah.
At that moment.
I guess I must have.
Yeah.
You know, and I will say this because I've thought a lot about that. Like living in that doghouse was not the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Like that connect also was like a friend of mine. Like I wasn't scared being out there.
Yeah.
You know, he was bringing me dope. I could hit him in his armpit. And so like he was bringing me dope. And, you know, it was fine. You know,
right.
to be in the doghouse.
People always say like, oh, what was your bottom? What was your lowest point? And it's just it's not necessarily that, because I have the
Right.
same thing, like so many bottoms.
Yeah.
But there's just that moment
Right.
for each of us.
And what someone did say to me once that actually I interviewed on my show was that preceding a bottom or the last time, sometimes there's like an emotional moment
Yeah.
that can lead to it. And if I look back, I think maybe for me, what all started to like kind of shape this was, so when I would get kicked out of a program, I would get into a sober living first, so that when I called my mom, I could say, I got kicked out, but it's fine. I'm here. Like, I'm starting again, whatever. And
Yeah.
I had done that. That's how I was in that last sober living. And I called her because she was going to come pick me up for lunch, thinking she's going to the program. And I was like, okay, I got kicked out, but it's fine. I'm in this other sober living, so just come get me.
Yeah.
She was like, all right. So she came and got me. We went to lunch, and when she dropped me off, she was like, okay, so, you know, obviously you've slipped.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And I'm fully strung out. I'm not just slipped. And she was like, okay, but more good days than bad days, right? And I said, yeah, more good days than bad days. And she was like, okay, we just figure out what you did wrong and we just start over. And I said, okay. And I got out of the car and she was driving away. And I remember thinking, like, you will never again make that woman sit next to you in a car and say, we'll just figure out what happened and start over.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot ever make her do that again, because I know right now she's crying as she drives away. You will never do that to her again, ever.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Yeah.
And obviously I didn't stop that day. That was like maybe 2 weeks prior.
Right.
But when he said that and I thought about it later, I think there may be some truth to that.
Yeah.
And maybe that was because I had a definite moment then, you know, and I didn't care at all how she felt
Yeah.
about anything ever.
Yeah.
No. She
We're
was the first
selfish in our
person I shit
addictions.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I cared what my dad think. What my dad thought. I never cared what she thought ever. I thought, but apparently I think I probably cared, you know, the most about,
Yeah.
you know, because she had sacrificed so much.
Yeah.
So that was that, you know, and I had relapsed so much. And what I often like to include here is that I was a chronic relapser, which I don't love that term, right? But we know what that means, a chronic relapser. But the good part about that is I knew what to do. You know, I knew the person at Sober Living. I already had a sponsor.
Yeah.
I knew where all the meetings were. I had
Right.
done step work before,
Uh-huh.
you know? And so when you come back in after a period of where you were trying, you do have more tools than the first time.
Right. Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know?
You don't lose all that.
No.
So what do you say to somebody out there right now that's watching this and doesn't know all those things and they're kicking heroin and they feel like they'd rather be dead? I mean, what would you say to that person?
So you may feel like you would rather be dead right now, but what made you want to kick in the first place? Is it even living to have $20 to breathe? Because as heroin addicts, like that's our plight, right? You have to have at least $20. I don't know now, but at least $20 to breathe, to take one step forward.
Yeah.
You have to. Yes, every single day. You can't do anything until you get well. And you're trapped. You can't do anything. You know, like my mom would want to go to the beach. I can't do that. I can't go to the beach with you. I can't go to my brother's wedding. I can't do anything because I might get sick. I have to be somewhere where I can get dope. That's not living.
Yeah, exactly.
You
And I'm
know?
relatable to that in a lot of ways too. I never used a needle, but mine was opiates, all
Oh, so
doctor
you know.
prescribed. But then I took way too much. So it was
Yeah.
like opiates, Adderall, and benzos.
Yeah.
So that was my cocktail.
Okay.
And I took amounts towards the end, especially like the last 10 years that should have killed me.
Yeah.
I mean, I overdosed many times, but
So you know you got sick from opiates, you know.
oh my God,
Yeah.
it's like the worst. But I think what makes it better for people that are listening is, you know, knowing that there is a way out with a plan.
Yeah.
You know, and if you can go into it with a plan, like, okay, I'm going to do AA, or I'm going to go to a sober living, or I'm
Yeah.
going to do these things, because time and time again, as we both know, because I was a chronic relapser too, I'd be like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I would kick, and it would be like 2 weeks of absolute hell, but I'd make it through. And then within a week,
Right.
I'm picking up again and I'm hating myself.
Right.
It's the worst. I didn't hang out with drug addicts. I was like a closet user.
Okay.
And so I didn't know anything about
Yeah.
recovery, meetings. Like, I didn't know what that was. Get a sponsor. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So I think like being able to tell people, you know, these things are available to you.
What did you do? Did you go to meetings or did you end up going to rehab?
I ended up going to rehab.
Okay.
That was after like 20 years.
Okay.
I went to rehab and
they brought you to meetings.
and that's
then
where
you
I learned about
Okay.
it. But if
Okay.
you don't go to treatment and
Right.
if you're not involved with these people, like how do you know? So it's good that, you know, we can share that information.
Yeah.
Like, hey, there is a way out. And for all of us, we have to have that community and support.
Right.
Whatever that looks like to you. I mean, people get into recovery lots of different ways.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, I did AA, you know, for 2 years straight, 24/7 pretty
Yeah.
much. And now, you know, I'll go a little bit. I'm not as hardcore. Some people are as hardcore and stay that way their whole entire lives.
Yeah.
You know, it all depends on the person, but obviously having that support system, like for you, having that community and that support system, what has that done for you in these last 8 years of being sober?
So in the beginning, it was vital. All I did in the beginning, like you just said, I did 12-step 24 hours a day too.
Yeah.
By then, I only knew addicts and people in recovery because I'd been in that world for so long. But because I'd been in and out of rehab, I knew a lot of people in recovery. So when I went to my friend's house, I was actually already seeing somebody that was in drug court and he took his recovery really seriously. And that's another rule that they say you don't see somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
But he took it really seriously. And so that definitely influenced me. And so all of my friends were in recovery. None of us had cars or licenses.
Yeah.
And so, because in my alternate universe, so I started teaching again really quickly. At 19 days, I started teaching again at a
Okay.
studio in Encinitas.
Nice.
And that studio, so I had my recovery community, and then that studio is really where that studio changed my life. That's the studio I ended up owning at 4 years.
Amazing.
That's the one that I bought.
Yeah.
Those women were, you know, they say in the room sometimes somebody will take time and they'll say, you loved me until I could love myself. I didn't super feel that way. I mean, I've had great relationships in the rooms, but
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like that. But I did at my studio, my fitness studio. And, but what was key was that I also had that recovery support
Right.
because they didn't know. And they all had cars and Lululemon clothes.
Right,
And I was
right.
taking the bus to Encinitas. You
Yeah.
know? And so I had support. I think what worked for me this time is that I was getting like accolades in my chosen profession. And I had the support in my sober living. And there was
Yeah.
a definite like dichotomy there where I felt so less than the women I was teaching. But through work I had done in the past with my sponsor, so as a chronic relapser, my sponsor had me start writing about the relapse. That would be my new step one. And my last time writing about it, I had gotten a job at a really nice clothing store in Carlsbad. And I was living in rehab and taking the bus there. And I got this job. And the first day I went there, and you have to have your stuff in a clear bag so that they know you're not stealing, I guess.
Yeah.
And they were like, so just leave everything in your car that you don't need. And I was like, well, like I don't have a car, but okay.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that shift, the owner was like, okay, so you did a really good job, but you can't tell if you work here or if you're shopping here. So when you come back tomorrow, just, you know, do me a favor, spice it up a little, accessorize a little.
Okay.
But I don't have anything. I don't own anything. And I was in like a welfare program. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
you know, and so I went back and I remember going through the donations bins and I found like a hat and some other stuff. And the girls let me borrow some things, but like I didn't know what was in style, you know? And
Yeah.
so I did my best and I went back to that job and I was walking up the next day and I saw myself in the like plate glass window and I saw myself and I remember thinking, you look like a fucking idiot. You do not belong here anymore. Like
Yeah.
these are real girls and real women and you are not. And I turned around and used that day and got kicked out of my program. And so I had written about that
Yeah.
and I realized that there was a pattern to my relapsing, which was feeling less than,
Yeah.
right? And so that was helpful too, I think, in this time because
Yeah.
I was in a prime spot where I would feel less than. In fact, the owner, who's now my really good friend, we still work together, is a, you know, wealthy young lady, right? She's done well for herself. And so she like already owned a home at 27. This was her business, you know,
Yeah.
and I knew I could feel that way again, but I had like done that work. And so I would say, okay, you're going to feel less than these women.
Yeah.
But what that does is that makes you shoot dope. And then you're going to be homeless for another year.
Right.
And buy yourself more time
Yeah.
before you're anywhere near where you want to be. And
Right.
it just kind of like took. So the recovery aspect of the community and the step work and coming to that insight. And then also the support that I found from my fitness studio was huge. Those women changed my life.
Yeah. And having that awareness to really see those things, which I think are so important.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because we need to look at those things like, okay, what is it really underneath that's taking me out?
Right.
And how do I, work on that?
Right.
And also just having that balance. I preach that a lot. Like, okay, so you get into recovery and you do the program that works for you, but that can't be everything.
Right.
And finding your purpose and your passion and what you like and what you love to do.
Right.
Obviously that, builds up your confidence and it makes you feel part of, and you have this like, life where it's not just that, you have these other things too. And I think that's so important as well.
Well, it gives us some hope too.
Absolutely.
Like I can build on this,
Yeah.
and I think it was really good for my confidence to be teaching again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
So when did the podcast start? How did that all come to be?
So I ended up, like I said, I bought that studio in 2019. So over the next 4 years, I got married. I met my husband in a meeting.
Congratulations.
We got married. And right when we got back from our honeymoon, like the day we got back, the woman who owned it wanted to sell it. And so we immediately went into escrow. So we opened in September 2019 and then COVID happened in March.
Yeah.
And so we had just opened and we're in California in a gym, and there were so many regulations. And looking back, it was such a great time for the studio and for our business. But, I didn't really know. I didn't know that was going to happen, obviously. But it ended up being fine. We went outside and we went online. But during that time, I just suddenly started feeling this overwhelming sense of if something happens to me, I have not said enough about recovery. You don't have to die a dope fiend. You don't. Because, you often see stories, more polished stories, right? And mine was really, 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 really dark, and jail and, all those things. And I was like, I haven't said enough about this. And I felt like I had escaped a burning building and I was on a porch with buckets of water. And it would be like walking away without throwing the water on,
Yeah.
And I just felt this overwhelming sense that I have to say what I did. I have to tell people what I did.
Yeah.
You don't have to die like this. So I got the desire to do that. I didn't know how, it's relatively simple to start a podcast, right? Where it was when I was doing it.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know. And I just one of the girls that worked for me had started one. And so I asked her how she did it, and she told me and got one going. And I had a friend that was a therapist and a client, and asked her if she wanted to do it with me. And that's kind of how it started.
Okay.
So,
and what was it like for you recovering out loud like that?
So I had kind of already been talking about it. I didn't start talking about my recovery publicly until I had 2 years. That was the first time I posted about it publicly. And even then, when I got another teaching job, I actually deleted my 2-year Instagram post so that they wouldn't see, which is actually the studio I now manage. But I still wasn't always, but by the time I was doing the show, I definitely spoke about it a lot. But I did panic the night before we published the first episode. I went in and erased my first name or my last name off everything. And I didn't promote it a lot in the beginning. It was a little scary at first, but I never really got any negative feedback, and
That's
again, by
amazing.
then most people knew anyways. So, and then what really changed for me was I've never had any luck on social media with my studios or myself personally. And I started making some chasing heroine TikToks and they did really well. And I realized that there was a recovery social media scene.
Yeah.
And so I leaned into that. And that was that still to this day, it's really the only success I've had in social media.
I love that. It's so funny because I have a similar but different story. I came out here at 19 to live the Hollywood dream too.
Oh, you
right?
did?
And that's the industry
that's
I was in until I got sober 7 years ago.
Did you live in LA?
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I moved every year for 16 years straight.
Oh, wow.
So I started in Hollywood, came all the way down the coast, and now I'm in Huntington Beach.
Okay.
But for me, I had some success working in that industry.
Okay.
But of course I was on pills the whole time and I didn't reach my full potential.
Yeah.
And so when I started doing, taking what I had learned in acting and all that and applying it in the recovery space, all of a sudden it's working. And I'm
Totally.
like, well, fucking look at this. It's because now I'm actually aligned
Right.
with what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to work because the other stuff wasn't what I was meant to be doing.
Isn't that fascinating? And
Yeah.
so my biggest fear was that I had lost everything, that I had lost my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a lawyer and or an actress speaking. And now I am doing my show where I'm
Yeah.
speaking and
Yeah.
I'm doing like my TikTok reels where I write creative things, kind of like acting.
Yeah.
And you wanted to do, and now you actually are. And I actually think those dreams don't die. Or like we were talking about my friend Dave, who does Dopey. He always wanted to be a talk show host
Yeah.
when he was a little kid. He is now. He's actually
Exactly.
doing that. And I think it's so cool to tell people that you probably didn't lose your dream. It may resurface in another way.
Absolutely. I always say, if you're like looking down on yourself and it's this huge maze of your life, looking at everything you've gone through, you know, the bad stuff when you're in it, you're like, oh, fuck, you know, this is horrible. Why is this happening to me? But knowing that it all has to happen
Totally.
to lead you to your true purpose.
Totally.
You know?
Chasing
So-
heroin.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly why I have that as the name.
That's
You know,
amazing. I
this is
love that.
Clearly my true purpose,
Yeah.
I feel.
So what have you learned about yourself the most through this process and having your podcast and everything?
Through the podcast in particular, I have learned, so I've actually learned a lot about recovery through the podcast. I was very, because I just didn't know, and you probably had a similar journey. I was very 12-step. There's just AA and NA, and I do HA.
Yeah.
And that's recovery. That's it. That's the only thing that works.
Yeah.
I have learned from interviewing so many people that, because I didn't even think Suboxone really worked. And then, I mean, it works,
Yeah.
but I didn't think it was like, could help you recover, you know?
Yeah.
And then through interviewing so many people, I've learned that that is not true. I've interviewed so many people that have gotten on Suboxone and either rebuilt their lives
Right.
or chose to get off
Yeah.
or chose to. So I've learned a lot about harm reduction through my
Right.
podcast, actually, because I also, my co-host, so I learned a lot actually from my co-host, Narcan Nate. So he dispenses Narcan, and I learned a lot about that stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of what I've learned about me, so recently, I think what I've learned is that, because I enjoy doing the podcast, but I also really want to do, and I've noticed, I think you do this too, I really want to focus more on YouTube and speaking, like, because I also share about personal development and growth when I'm teaching spin.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to continue combining those
That's a
and
great idea.
and speaking. And I've learned that this is definitely something I want to do.
yeah.
It's very hard to do, though. It's hard to like monetize, right? As we were saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've learned that I can have an impact.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you
In that
do have an
world,
impact.
you know?
And you have been impactful. And it gives us this second chance at life.
Yeah.
And this why not me mentality.
Right.
I used to be that person that would sit and go, oh, maybe for her, maybe for him, be kind
Right.
of jealous, whatever. Not for me. And it's like, well, why not us?
Right.
You know,
Yes.
like why can't when here we are out doing it? And it helps other people see, fuck, look at everything they went through and they're doing it. Hopefully they can take the why not me mentality.
Right. Exactly.
What would you say to a woman out there right now that's struggling, wants to find her voice and doesn't know how to do that?
So I would say, where are you comfortable finding your voice first, and what level are you at currently? Because
Yeah.
because finding your voice doesn't necessarily mean having a social media platform,
Right, exactly.
And I know that from teaching spin.
Yeah.
Finding your voice could really be finding something that you enjoy and making time for yourself.
Yes.
I have so many women that come into my spin classes and they're so scared and they want to change, and they've seen on Instagram, but it's like these beautiful tiny girls in sports bras and they just feel like really intimidated.
Yeah.
And they come in and they find that they love it and they're good at it, and they start cheering and they move to the
Yeah.
front row.
Yeah.
And they celebrate their 100th ride and they post on Instagram. That is a manner of finding your voice. So,
Absolutely.
you know, leaning
Yeah.
into something that you enjoy doing and actually like taking and making time for yourself. And if
Yeah.
you have no idea what that is, start exploring. That's one thing
Yes.
that obviously we know there are disadvantages to social media, but one massive advantage to social media is that you might see a spin class, or you might see somebody doing, I don't know why this came to my mind, but the trampoline bouncy things.
Oh yeah. You
I
never
don't even know why that
what-
came to my mind.
You
Yeah.
never know what you're going to like.
Yeah. Or it doesn't even necessarily be fitness. It could be
Yeah.
my, I'm starting actually co-hosting another show as well, a personal growth and development show. And my new co-host makes soap,
Okay.
homemade soap.
Yeah.
You might like soap.
Yeah.
You know, like
just try new
yeah,
things.
trying
Get
something
out
new.
there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
How can people find you?
So I'm Chasing Heroine across all platforms, Chasing Heroine with an E, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Okay.
On TikTok, they won't let you search it.
Okay.
But if you search Chasing Hero and push enter,
Okay.
I come up.
There you
Or
go.
they're all linked from my Instagram as well.
Okay.
So
Well, thank you for recovering out loud.
Thank you, Jenny.
You are a voice in the community. I absolutely love everything that you're doing.
thank you so much.
And just being another strong woman out there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, you guys. We'll see you next time.